Welcome to the Circuit of Success Podcast.
The Circuit of Success Podcast.
With your host,
Brett
Gilliland. Brett Gilliland, Visionary Wealth Advisory.
The Circuit of Success Podcast. Let's start the show.
Welcome to the Circuit of Success. I'm your host, Brett Gilliland. Today I've got Phil Kornachuk with me. Phil, how you doing?
I'm doing great, Brett.
Awesome, man. Good to be with you. Where are you calling in from today?
So right now I'm in my office in Lake Oswego, Oregon.
Lake Oswego. I was just in Oregon in, when was I there? August into September for the first time ever. I did a little golf trip out to Bandon Dunes. It's phenomenal.
Oh, nice. Bandon's beautiful. My wife and I were out there last year and love it.
Okay. Yeah. It's pretty intimidating when you're hitting a golf ball and like 2 feet over is like, a 200-foot drop. It feels like it was amazing.
Yeah. That's a super cool area.
It is. It's very cool. So you are Phil Kornachuk, as I said. You are served in the 2nd Battalion Rangers, the Green Berets, for 22 years. You had 12 deployments, a Silver Star honor, which is amazing. That's the third highest honor for valor in combat. And now you're helping people and businesses with high-performance leadership and skills through Stonewater training, man. So, one, thank you for your service and your dedication to our country. It's amazing. Thank you for that. And we have an Air Force base. I'm pointing to it. It's about 3 miles that way. So we get to see the men and women in our military here every day. We go to lunch. We see them all, and so just so thankful for everybody that does what they do. So appreciate you, man.
No, thank you.
So let's dive in. And again, Stonewater training is what you're doing now. You're helping businesses and leaders all over the world, with high performance training. And so we'll talk about that. But before we dive into that, if you can, give us the backstory, man. What helped make Phil the man he is today?
Yeah. Okay. So if your listeners have like 6 hours, we'll get into it now. But I'll give you the Reader's Digest condensed version here. So in bottom line, I was born at a very young age, like a lot of us, and actually originally from Canada, and rural Eastern Canada. Dad was a pastor. Mom was, stay-at-home wife. And it's at 16, I just kind of had enough. I was kind of a weird little private school, and I thought I knew better. So I left home and struck out on my own, which went about as well as can be expected. My brother let me stay at his place for a bit. And then one thing led to another, and I actually ended up joining the Canadian Army on my 17th birthday. That's when I first went into the recruiters. So I did that for about a year and a half, and you can probably tell at this point in life, I wasn't exactly on the highway to epic success. But when I first went in the Canadian Army, there was people who really could care less about what my excuses or my backstory was. They were just like, shut up and do the work. They were leaders who, I wouldn't say they were great. I'd say they were good, and they just held me to the standard. Showed me what needed to be done, gave me the tools to do it, and did not take no for an answer. So I quickly realized, when failure is not an option, I can actually do pretty decent. And I, one thing led to another. I ended up finishing high school, and then this was in the early 90s. So the U.S. Army had really cool commercials, and I'm in Canada. I was a dual citizen. My mom's from Louisiana.
Okay.
And showed people doing wheelies on motorcycles out of the back of helicopters and paddling Zodiac through swamps at night. And I'm like, I need to get some of that, because the Canadian Army had like 14 people and 9 guns. So I'm like, I need the helicopters and the motorcycles. You're just adrenaline junkie 20-year-old at the time, or 19-year-old. And so I came down, joined the U.S. Army, and it was pretty easy. I mean, I've been doing the Army thing for a bit, but again, I had leaders who were like, hey man, you've got more to give. So they saw potential in me that I didn't see in myself, and they encouraged me to apply for officer training, which I thought was ridiculous because all I saw them do was paperwork. And they're like, the paperwork is ridiculous, Phil, but have you seen the pay scales? And then I looked at the pay, and I'm like, you know what? I can do some paperwork. So I threw my name in the hat. I got picked up for officer training. I went to Gonzaga University, which was just an awesome institution, learned a lot about culture there, and just it kind of took me to another level. So you're seeing this blend of academic with experiential learning. And so then in 2000, I get commissioned as an infantry officer. Now I am the leader. And so all kinds of successes and failures, learning the hard way, what works and what doesn't when you're trying to provide purpose, direction, and motivation to, 30 to 50 people.
Yeah.
Just when I started to get the hang of that, again, leader I was working for is an amazing guy named Mick Nicholson. He's retired as a 4-star general. He was my battalion commander at the time, and he goes, "Hey, Phil, yeah, you got more to give. Where do your passion and your talent intersect?" And he goes, "That's where you really need to pour into it for life." And I said, "I don't know." And he goes, "Okay, well, in the meantime, you should go try out for the Rangers." And I'm like, "Come on, man! Like I'm finally just getting comfortable here. I was pretty happy with mediocrity." And he's like, "Nope." It's like, "Give it a shot. Like, the only failure is a failure to try." Because in my head, I had the imposter syndrome, right? I'm a high school dropout. I barely, made it through that. I was kind of a train, in my own mind, I was a bit of a train wreck. And this guy's telling me to try out for this elite unit. And he believed in me, and I trusted him as my leader. So finally I'm like, all right, whatever. I'll give it a shot. I won't quit, and we'll see where it goes. And I got picked up, and that's where I started serving 2nd Ranger Battalion. This was the start of 9/11 happened in this time frame.
Okay.
So now I'm in the Rangers, and now we're starting to send people to Afghanistan and getting ready to send folks to Iraq. So for any of your listeners who are familiar with the professional football player Pat Tillman, it's the same organization he later served in, and he's a leadership story and a culture story in his own right. Just an exceptional human being whose legacy lives way past him. The fact that we're talking about it 20 years after his death kind of says something about it.
Right.
So yeah, I was there. I started deploying to combat, deployed 3 times with them, and had some pretty, intense experiences, learned a lot about myself, learned a lot about leadership, and actually had a small break in service from there, where I became a civilian again. We had our first child. I deployed 3 times, and I'm like, okay, let me try this civilian thing, which I found out after a year and a half of effort, I wasn't quite ready for yet.
Like, this sucks. Get me
I felt,
back.
yeah, well, it was almost more of a guilt, because this was in 2004, 2005 timeframe. So I had a lot of friends that were going overseas and getting hurt, and some that were dying. And I'm like, hey, I'm sitting here, pretty easy life, while they're still, out suffering. And I shouldn't say suffering, but, overseas doing work. And, I had the experience, the skills, and the drive to do it. So I threw my name in the hat, came back in. And once again, I told him I'd do anything. Like I'll drive trucks. I'll serve meals. I don't care what jobs are out there. I'm like, I left. I was a captain, had 3 combat tours. I was with the Rangers, but use me as you see fit. And they were like, well, let's get you back on track. I went into, it was actually military school. And while I was there, a Green Beret instructor was like, hey man, you should check out the Green Berets, go to tryouts. So I did that. That was an amazing experience. I made it there, and I was a special forces team leader for several years. And, again, very, intense formative experiences, wins, losses, lessons learned, friends lost. And once again, I had another leader who said, hey, this is General Scott Miller, who, also retired 4-star, and he was the head of Joint Special Operations Command. But he's like, hey, man, he kind of heard about my team because of some of the events we were in. And once again, he's like, I think you got more to give. Like, you should check out some of these other organizations. And now, we're looking at teams that I was like, I have no business being here. But once again, someone else believed in me. I trusted them, threw my name in the hat, and, ended up serving in some pretty unique places with some amazing people. Left that all in 2019, and that's where it's like, hey, the Army invests a ton in leadership. I've learned a lot. Sometimes it's been from making some pretty epic mistakes with very high costs, and I was asking myself, what can I do with this knowledge, and how can I share it and translate it for others to use, let that legacy go forward. And one thing led to another, but long story short, that's what finally ended up with Stonewater coming into being.
Wow. That's amazing, man. Well, thank you for sharing all that. And what I hear in there is a couple things. One, you said numerous times people believing in you, right? And believing in you first. And I think, as a leader of an organization sometimes, and you're meeting with leaders of organizations, you are a leader of an organization. We have to see that, right? And I think it's our right and our duty as a leader to tell people that and challenge them. So when you hear that, my way, what comes to mind for you when you hear that?
Yeah, so absolutely, I agree. I think that's one of the key things about leadership, right? Is a lot of times you're going to have people on their team that have potential and have drive that far exceeds their current position, and being able to spot that and not be threatened by that or intimidated by it, but instead, encourage them to take the next step to, hey, work on that executive MBA. Hey, try this position. Hey, go to this program.
Yeah.
And it's not always pushing, right? Everyone's got a different path, and you're not always projecting on them, but seeing, like at the time, Colonel Nicholson told me, or retired General Nicholson, hey, what excites you? What do you love? What brings you joy? And what are you really good at? And let's look where that overlap is. I think there's I don't know the Japanese word for it. They have another word for it, but it's like what you love, what you're good at, what the world needs. And then I think what you can make money at, and where those four
Oh
circles
yeah. Yeah. I know what you're
intersect.
talking about. Yep.
Like that's your career. There's a cool word for it. I'm just not thinking of it right now. So I think as leaders, being able to know your people and your team at that level, and then exactly like you said, challenging them, but then giving them the tools they need to succeed. And to me, one of the biggest honors, I got to work towards the end of my career with a lot of young officers, and and even when I was, in some of the special operations organizations, I was in charge of, recruiting and assessing folks and training them, and mostly on the leadership side of the fence. So we're bringing in seasoned Green Berets, Navy SEALs, Marine special operators, and leveling them up. And I think one of the biggest points of pride for me is watching where some of them have gone since then, like the levels they've gone to, the things they've accomplished. And there's a little bit of professional jealousy, like, oh man, they were really good. But there's also some pride, like I was part of that journey. I was part of that story. I saw them. I was the person who encouraged them. And I think there's a lot of power in that. And you build a really neat, close circle that's a vicious upward spiral when you do it right.
I love it. So that's called Ikigai. I just looked it up while you were talking. Ikigai.
Thank
It's
you.
the same thing. It says often depicted as a Venn diagram with four overlapping circles representing what you love, what you're good at, what the world needs, and what you can be paid for. Those are the elements, right?
Yeah,
Perfect.
exactly.
I like that.
Nailed it.
Ikigai. I wrote that down. So talk to us a little bit about the training if you can, because I mean, you just make it sound like it's easy to become in the second battalion of Ranger, a Green Beret. You hear your Navy SEAL friends all the time talk about BUDS training and how difficult it is. Yours is no walk in the park, right? And so, and you're laughing there because I've heard some of my buddies talk about that before. But give us what you can, a little bit of flavor on what the hell that takes, because it's not easy.
Yeah, so I think it's a combination of things. So any of the organizations, most of them have a pretty similar process where there are established standards, maybe they're physical or technical or tactical, that you're expected to meet or exceed to be part of that organization. So think of that as almost like a gateway, right? You have to be able to run so fast or ruck so far in such a time, and shoot this and do that. So there's clearly established standards, and they're not waverable. They're binary. You either make it or you're not. But then I think that's assessing skills, and it also assesses the candidate's ability to prepare for something challenging. But I think what is even more important is how do you find the inner attributes, values, and qualities of an individual? Like, what's their decision making like? Where's their moral compass oriented? Do they have grit? Can they stick with it? Because what's really fascinating to me, and again, I've been on both sides of this fence, right? Going through these different screening processes that can last, weeks and even months, and sometimes, and then I've also been running them, or the commander for some different, training aspects. What's really interesting to see is when you have someone who's succeeded their entire life. They were the captain of the high school football team. They had a 4.0. Yeah. They went to an Ivy League school. They've got, they just continued to excel, and they would come into summer processes, and now everyone to their left and right is at that level, except for Phil Kornachuk, who was a high school dropout. He's only there because someone thought he could be there, and he didn't want to let them down. But you would see some of those people, and then they would start to not do as well compared to their peers as they thought they would. So instead of focusing on the process, they focused on the people left and right, and they started to grade themselves based on how everyone else was, and they'd get in their own head. And if they'd fail once or twice, a lot of times people who never counted failure would blow up and they would just pull themselves out. And it was mind numbing to see. I remember once, and he was actually he's a world-class Ironman athlete. So physical specimen, extremely intelligent, good person, combat experience, going through one of these, programs where he's being assessed for, service at a higher level. And I'd say higher in air quotes. It's just a different level, but it's, pretty selective organization. And I remember being alongside. So I was running the program and I was alongside this person and I was just doing all I could to keep up. Now, of course, when he looked at me, I had to look like it was easy. So there was a little bit of acting going on. But I remember thinking to myself, like, wow, this guy's off the charts. Like, wow, I wish I was this fit. And that night, he threw in the hat and, threw in the towel. Sorry. And I remember talking to him like, man, what's going on? He's like, I could get injured, and I'm like, so you're quitting, this job or potentially this job that you put a lot of heart and soul in because you might, not even because you are injured, but because you might get injured. And you just sort of set back and go, okay, I mean, fear of failure is a bear. And this top performer pulled himself out. And I mean, it was, again, physically met or exceeded probably anyone else in that, in that course. But the potential of maybe I'll get hurt. And it was really a fear of failure on his part. Like, what if I don't win type thing? And so that's the hard part to assess. So when you ask, like, what is it about the training? I mean, I'd say, well, the Rangers want you to move this far, this fast. As a Green Beret, there's going to be a lot of navigation up and down, hills and swamps and sand dunes. And every organization has different stuff. And I'm dated. I haven't, it's been over 10 years since I've gone to anything like that. But the special sauce, if you would, is trying to be able to identify, the heart and the mind. Like, how does this person think and what do they use to make their judgments? Because if you give me someone with the right attributes, if they have drive, if they have integrity, if they're adaptable, if they're committed, as long as they meet that physical baseline, I can bolt on any skills to that person.
Right.
It might take longer for some, but I will take that person 10 out of 10 times over someone who shows up with all the skills and they're off the charts. But if their integrity is a little shaky, if they're doing it for ego or for self, which, you can't do the job I did well for a long time if it's all about you, because you're repeatedly putting yourself at risk for others.
Yeah.
So that's the thing, is that finding the right attributes, which I'd argue that's not just a military thing. That's any organization. Like, give me the right person who's purpose driven, and sky's the limit.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. I've been around a couple of buddies that, were very high up in the military, and you look at them, they're not the physical specimen, right? You talk about the high school quarterback and, the 6'4" guy, and just you look like a pretty big dude on here. So you may be the
I'm standing on a telephone book.
Exactly. And the camera adds 30 pounds, right? And so, but you look at them, but they got the mindset, man. They got this thing up here that's different than anything. Like, they'd rip my head off in a millisecond, right? Even though they may be my size, but they've got another gear. And I think whether you're in business, in sports, or military, whatever it may be, the mind is so important, isn't it?
Absolutely. And that's the challenge, right? Is how do you train that? I can train my body pretty easily, but how do I train myself to perform under pressure? How do I train myself to deal with stress, to stay calm and forget even work? Like, again, I've got 8 kids, right? We talked about that. Yeah. How do I stay calm when I have a 17-year-old go, Dad, I totaled your truck. And, your gut reaction is to emotionally respond. And you're like, but is that the dad I want to be in the moment? No, I want to be someone else. So it's training. Yeah. That headspace is key.
Yeah, absolutely. So talk to us about the success you thought you may have, or lack of success you thought you may have, depending on how you looked at it. When you were in your 20s, and I don't know how old you are today, but I think you and I, we were on the phone the other day, we're pretty close in age. I'm 46. Like, how do you define success today versus what you thought success looked like when you were, say, 25?
Yeah, so I'm 49, so we're in the ballpark there. And when I was in my 20s, I think success was much more focused on accomplishments. Like, did I make it into this organization? Did I
Yeah.
accomplish said test to some level? I wasn't really income driven, so that wasn't on on my charts. But there was kind of, hey, can I pass Ranger School? Can I be the top officer candidate in Ranger School? Can I get into Ranger Battalion? Can I be a Green Beret? And what's funny is you define that as success, and then you get in there and you realize, whoa, actually, this is just the beginning. Like, that was
Yeah.
opening the door to walk into the castle. Now I've got to navigate it. So that was 20-year-old Phil was very results oriented, results focused. And I would say 49-year-old Phil is much more focused on, okay, what success is ongoing. Like, you never achieve complete success, but at the same time, you can be successful every single day.
Mhm.
Meaning, if I have my purpose and my values nailed down, and I know my roles and I know my priorities, any day under any conditions, I can execute and achieve success in that area. I can embody integrity. I can embody discipline, love. I can evolve and grow as a person. I can display courage. And so it's independent of, did I make X amount a year? Did I close this contract?
Right.
That's a product of the process. But I think success to me is more, hey, am I living my purpose? Am I living my values? The scoreboard I work with some different college teams, and it's like the scoreboard takes care of yourself if you have all this on lockdown. At least I believe so.
Yeah, absolutely. 100%. So, bravery, courage, whatever the word is that you want to use, again, being a silver star in our military, there's a lot of bravery that went there, right? You went into some serious situations, some things happened. So, how do you define bravery now after what you've been through? And if you can, sorry to interrupt, if you can kind of apply that to what bravery would mean for me. I've never been on a battlefield like that, right? But bravery could be that person listening that's got to make that big phone call that makes them nervous, right? Or they got to go give that
Yep.
presentation that makes them nervous. And so how do you define that?
Yeah. So I think, to back up, there's acts under fire, and I think I earned a silver star, and I'd argue probably several other people earned higher awards than I ever should have. Um, in those same actions or in follow-on actions. So there's a lot of luck and circumstance that goes into that, and that's not me being self-deprecating. That's just completely honest. Be at the right place at the right time and don't die, and sometimes it pans out. And I had an amazing team that they carried me. I was just where do we go? What do we do? And anyways,
Right.
I digress. Um, let me go back. So I think to really have courage is you have to have fear, you have to have concern. And what I was saying about the silver star, like on that particular day, even though we were under heavy fire for about 10 hours from multiple directions inside and outside this compound, we were trying to clear. I wasn't particularly afraid at any point. Just like, you're doing work, like that's what I had trained for up to that point, probably 12 or 13 years. I was fairly experienced. At the same time, for me, courage now is like, it's got to be something that concerns you, that stresses you, that you're anxious about, that you're fearful of, but I know it's the right thing. I'm going to do it anyway. So it's that hard
Yeah.
conversation with a partner, with a friend, with a kid. It's the I live in Portland, and there's a large homeless population, and so for me, it's like, hey, you can sit there and complain about it, or you can actually connect with them and hear their story, and just be a person to them. But part of me is like, I don't know about that. Like, what if they're tweaking? What if it's this? Like, you give yourself,
Right.
like, like, I don't want to do that. Like, it concerns me. I don't know if it's fear, but you don't want to do it. And so I'll just kind of direct myself and, like, no, you're going to do this for that exact reason, that it isn't comfortable. It's not easy for you. You relax. Now, I know other people that have zero issues going up and talking to anyone. I actually get social anxiety, which is ironic because we're on a podcast. So for me to engage in certain elements with certain people is hard for me. And I
Yeah.
get kind of anxious. And then it's like, okay, that's where I got to flip my bravery switch. You tell me to go base jumping or, do something physically challenging. I'm usually not afraid. I might not be excellent at it, but the physical part, like
You'll make it happen.
worked that muscle out for my whole life, but the social aspect, the emotional aspect, the hard conversation with someone, close friend, you see just making epically bad decisions and stepping in and being like, hey, you're, knowing that friendship's on the line and calling them on something in a constructive way. Like that's to me is bravery. And I can usually tell because my heart rate goes to about 200 and you're sweating. Like your body's telling you like, you're scared of this.
That's funny. But it's good, man. And so it makes me think too, for what you're willing to talk about here is, you've been to some of the, what I would classify as the scariest places on earth, with people, like you said, wanting to, they're shooting guns and bombs and everything at you. Like, how do you, like, you're on that plane or you're on that, that Hummer, that Humvee going, or the tank, wherever you're at, like, how do you get yourself in the mindset, again, at a whole nother level for those listening, than the guy or gal that's getting ready to walk into that presentation they want to nail, right? So, but to them, that's their war, right? So, like, how do you get yourself at an okay spot? And I know it's training. I know it's a lot of training. That's one of it. But there are other things to where you can mentally tell yourself, okay, dude, I'm going to war here. I'm getting ready to get out of this thing. It's going to be freaking crazy. How do I go calm myself and go do the things I was trained to do?
Yeah, so I think it's multiple levels, multiple steps, right? So first off, there's the training, the preparation, really the habits you've had in your life up until that point. Are you physically prepared? Are you mentally, tactically, technically proficient in your job? And that's, there's no rewind button. Like you can't go back and make that 24 hours before you have that big presentation. You've either done it or you haven't. But then when you get that mission, using the presentation example for you, or like a combat mission for me, where you're like, hey, in 24 hours, you need to do this. So I was part of the Jessica Lynch rescue mission. I remember that came down, and it was about roughly a 24-hour flash to bang. And it was actually April 1st when I first heard about it. And I thought it was a joke. I thought they were messing, like, oh, we're going to go rescue this prisoner. Sure we are. And then they're like, no, we seriously are.
No, this is no April Fool's joke.
Yeah, it's like, no, Phil, seriously, wake your platoon up. And that was in 2nd Rated Battalion. Wake your platoon up and let's go. But so I think, there's what you've done up until that moment where it's go time, the mission, the presentation, the big call. And then there's understanding what the purpose is. Like, okay, what's this about and what's my role in it? So having clarity of vision, and then having a plan, like planning through things. Don't just wing it. Some of the biggest catastrophes I've seen overseas are when people who are really skilled and really proficient winged it because they're like, oh, we got this. And then they went out, and I've been in some pretty elite units, and I've seen some pretty epic failures where people were overconfident. The planning and then the rehearsals was always key. Even if we only had 50, like there's been times where some of my favorite pictures from overseas were working with these host nations, maybe they're Afghanis or Iraqis or, Filipinos, and we're mapping out a mission, but we've only got half an hour and we don't even speak the same language. But we're going through it on this dry erase board outside, at night under headlamps. And then we would walk through like, this is what we're going to do. This is what we're going to do if someone gets injured. And this is how we're going to, if the enemy's not here, this is where we're going to go next. So that planning and that rehearsal and then looking at what could go wrong was key. So that when you're actually on the helicopter and you're 6 minutes out, you've already mentally gone through that mission and maybe even physically walked through it in as close a circumstance as you can and as time allowed before. So when it's go time, you're like, okay, this is about what I expected. Now, at the same time, things can go sideways, but you've got that reserve in your mind. Like, hey, someone might ask me a question out in left field in this presentation. Someone might get really offended. I might have a gaffe or say something offensive. How do I recover on that? And, you're working through what could go wrong. And then finally on those last 6 minutes, so I've done the planning, I understand my purpose, I have clarity of vision. I made the plan. We rehearsed it as good as we can. Now we're just about there. Your heart rate's picking up, physiologically, I'll do, box breathing. I'll kind of go through a mantra in my head. Jason Selk's a sports psychologist. He's written a bunch of books. I've done some work with him. and he has
He's been on
just
this
some great
podcast a
tech.
couple times. He was my third or
Oh,
fourth guest ever. Yeah, 6.5, 7 years ago.
oh,
I've known Jason for a long time.
oh, that's awesome. Yeah, I was down with
Yeah,
Vegas with him last December, and just
yeah,
love, yeah. And I've been following his stuff from a special operations background for since about 2015, I'd say. And
okay,
it's
yeah,
hugely applicable. But he writes it for business leaders, and I was like, well,
yeah,
this is good. We can. One of my instructors actually brought it to me saying we need to use this, with our students to get a higher pass rate, like because people would get in their own head. They all had the
yeah,
hardware, they just couldn't get out of the way. So we'll use some of his, like the centering breath, the identity statement, the performance statement. We would do those things, the
yeah.
visualization. And I was actually working with some special operations folks last fall, and we were practicing that work as they were getting ready to head and do some stuff in the real world. So
That's
it
awesome.
totally applies, and I still use that when I've doing a workshop with some hospitals here in the Northwest, and I will still do that same drill in my mind. I'm 10 minutes out, I'm doing my centering breath, I'm going through my performance statement for how do I need to engage and be present. I'm visualizing my best presentation ever, visualizing how this one's going to go, going through an identity statement, another centering breath, and then it's all right. I've done all I can do, and you just have to let go and
Yeah.
execute.
And it's incredible, 'cause when I wrote that question down, I certainly wasn't thinking we were going to talk about Jason and centering breath and identity statements. But it's cool to hear though, right? Because again, I'm thinking about the untrained man who's going to be on a helicopter here, and you're going to say, okay, in 6 minutes, I'm going to drop you off in that field over there, and it's go time. Like I'm like, oh shit, like it's crazy. And so, uh, but I love to hear that because it's the same thing for me. Like I do what's called Sunday planning. So every Sunday, I'm looking at my week ahead. Monday, right? Monday. Here's my meeting. So knowing today is Thursday, you know, at now 1:42 p.m. I thought about this meeting last, 5 days ago, right? And I knew what you looked like due to my research, and so I'm literally picturing being in the meeting with Phil. What's that going to look like? I picture my client meetings. I picture shaking their hand in the lobby. They come back to my office. We sit down in the seats. Like we've been there, right? We know that. So again, whether it's on a helicopter and you're 6 minutes out or you're walking into a big meeting, I think it's important to have already been there, man.
Yeah, it's huge, and it's ironic because it's so easy to forget. It's so easy to blow off, be
Yeah.
like, no, 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 I'm gonna write these notes. I'm gonna do some more research. It's like, no, you just stop, breathe, focus on what you need to do, focus on what it needs to look like. Tell yourself who you are, breathe, execute. You know,
Yep. I love that. Love that so much. Talk about investing in yourself. I mean, through whether that's through hiring staff, other teammates, whether that's development, that's personal growth. I mean, how important is that to you, and how important it is to what you're doing now at Stonewater Training, like the leaders that you work with that are paying, right? They're investing, they're doing that. Why are they doing it, and what do you think about it?
yeah. So, bottom line, I think investing in yourself and building yourself. It's literally one of my core values. Is I call it evolution, and I'm not trying to grow like a third thumb or anything like that. It's about how do I adapt, evolve, and grow to become a better version of myself in all areas. So I take a very intentional, disciplined approach to it, where I'm looking at, hey, what am I? We all love to stay in our comfort zone, so I'm looking for what am I uncomfortable with? Where are my knowledge gaps? Where are my skill gaps? And how can I start poking at those and addressing them? Now, it doesn't mean I spend my whole time doing things I'm not good at. That's not the point of it. Like, it's
Right.
got to be aligned with the roles, the purpose, the vision you have. But I think continually learning, like what I think JFK is like, leading and learning are indispensable from each other. He has a quote like that. And I think that's key. So a lot of the leaders who I work with, it's amazing. Like the fundamentals never get old, right? I use the
Right.
analogy like LeBron James still practices free throws. I think he does. I don't know him, but I assume he does.
Yeah.
And and I know at the most elite organizations, what we did was essentially the same fundamentals I had learned 20 years prior. They were just done with such a precision, speed, and intensity under any environment that they no longer look like fundamentals. But if you
Yeah.
peel back the layers, you're like, wait a sec, I learned this when I was 17, in Petawawa, Canada. Like, this is not different. It's just,
Right.
well, it looks different because it's so intense and so fast and so good. So I'll have people who come work with me, and they'll be, a doctor in his 50s, and he's literally like, hey, I want to work on doing a better job of defining my life purpose, laying out my core values. I want to rebuild a healthy set of habits that will propel me on success and all these different roles I've defined for myself. Super elementary basic stuff, but it never gets old, right? Like, you're never going to, there's always room to grow, room to sharpen some more. So I'll have folks come with me, we'll work on the fundamentals. Some of them will come and tackle specific problems. But what I really love from the leadership development aspect is you can learn by reading. You can learn by reading, taking notes, sharing, teaching, I think, is a great way to learn also. But I think experience, and especially sticky, unusual experiences, are really powerful as long as they're linked to learning outcomes and objectives. So a lot of what I'll do is try to, facilitate an experience where I can bring diverse leaders together, put them in an experience. And it's framed and it's intentional. It's not, hey, you're going to be scared and thrashed for 3 days or 5 days. That's not the point of it. It's, hey, we're working on adaptable leadership. Here's some academic foundations. Let's do some personal work. Okay, now let's go execute this in a totally different environment, but the principles are the same. I mean, we've been talking back and forth about, boardroom to battlefield in this podcast, and looks very different. But when you peel back all the layers, you're like, no, I've got to have a vision. I've got to have a plan. I need to make sure my mind and heart are right, calm myself down, and then execute. And that's no different than what I do.
It's amazing, and it's funny. I had an Olympic athlete on here, and I asked something similar, how do you win a gold medal, whatever I said, and she's like, I wrote down the biggest thing I did for 4 years prepping was I wrote down every day what I was grateful for, and I spent 10 minutes on meditation. I'm like, well, son of a gun, right? I could have been an Olympic athlete, but it's like, but you think about it, we always think there's that magic bullet, right? There's that one thing that's going to change it, the secret sauce, the recipe, whatever it is. And it's not, man. It's breathing. It's having a vision. It's having a plan. It's doing exactly what you said. It reminds me when you talk about LeBron and free throws. I was on the field at spring training. I don't know. It's probably 2015 with the St. Louis Cardinals, my beloved St. Louis Cardinals. And I remember being on the field during practice and watching these guys, and the shortstops were out doing, like 20 backhands, and then they'd go and do their, the other side, their glove hand side. And then the pitchers were working on bunting. And I'm like, again, scratch my head, like, this is amazing. This is what I teach my 9-year-old in baseball, right? These things, these guys are still doing it. They're the most elite level out there, and they're just doing the basics. So if we, as business leaders, can just do the basics, man, you're going to wake up in a different spot.
Yeah, I think that's why when I'll work with, individuals or leadership teams, like, hey, tell me your why. Like, why does this organization exist? What's it all about? And how do you want your legacy to be? Meaning, you're eventually going to leave this organization, or if you work till you die, then you work till you die. But what's the legacy after? What's that story? And then how do we do that today? Or how do we do that with this specific client, or this specific task? And it's interesting because for some, not all, but for quite a few, especially the ones I work with, it's not about the P&L report. It's not about the bottom line. They have something else they're working on. Now, of course, they want to be profitable and successful and take care of their team and their clients. But usually it was some other idea or concept. They're like, hey, I want to change 100,000 lives, physically and spiritually, or, whatever it is. I work with a team that is one of their visions. Again, it's profitable if they do it, but at the end of the day, it's about the impact they want to have, and to center up on that and go, okay, if this is what matters, then what do we need to do today to make it happen? It's simple, but simple and easy, they're not always the same thing.
Yeah, no, you're right. You're absolutely right. What risk are you happy you took?
Oh boy, that's so I'll tell you the most recent risk I had. And this is a collective one. This is a family risk. So when I retired from the military, my family and I, we lived in Bozeman, Montana, which is to me like heaven.
Yeah.
You got mountains, you got water, you're just north of Yellowstone, it's everything. They have a Costco, so you checked all the boxes. And my wife had a good job. I was retired from the military. I was doing what I do now, but kind of almost not for fun, but there wasn't financial pressure.
You haven't built anything up yet. Yeah.
Yeah. So we were comfortable, and just talking to my wife about, hey, what's your vision? What's your best life? What's, it's kind of similar stuff I do with clients. And when we were younger, before we'd had kids, med school was kind of on the to-do list for her, but life happened. I was deployed a lot. She lost her mother. We had kids, like, just, again, life happened.
Yeah.
And so fast forward, 18 years later, is like, hey, what's your dream? What's your vision? And that kept coming up. And it's like, well, like, why not try? It's like, well, 40, we have 8 kids. We live in a great place. We have to move. And, the excuses not to were many and logical and rational. And it was like, yeah, but like when you're 80 and you look back at life, like, if you didn't try, will you ask yourself, man, I wish I had.
Man.
And so we talked about it, and I was like, well, what's the next thing to do? And I'm totally taking credit for her risks here. See how I'm doing that? But
once you move aside, we bring her on. Let's get her on the button. No.
Yeah, I'll pull her in and he's much more well spoken than me also. Right. But so she threw her name in the hat. She dusted off her books. She took the MCAT. She did okay. She did good on that. She got picked up by her stretch school, and we moved to Oregon and began her journey. She's a third-year med student now. It's still an amazing athlete and mom and partner, and checks all the boxes. So that was pretty cool to see. Yeah,
that was very.
But it's cool. One of those things. It was, and as I say it, like it's ongoing challenge, right? Like your stretch life, your vision, your best you. That's not the easiest you. That's not the most comfortable you.
That's right.
I left a comfortable job. I was working for another company doing real similar stuff to what I do now. We were living in Oregon. I didn't have any business contacts, and I just felt pulled to, drawn to start Stonewater. I had a previous company in Montana. It got acquired, and I just worked for the company that acquired it. So, supporting a family of 9, a wife who's a full-time medical student, which is kind of time consuming. Walking, in a market I had no connections in. I stepped away from a salary, stepped away from safety, and just bootstrapped to build Stonewater on the belief that, like, I think this is really good and will change lives. And I think people recognize that and see value in it, and that'll let me take care of these 9 people that are dependent on me to succeed. That was, going on 2 years ago, and it's been good.
Yeah. Do you believe in a plan B? And the reason I ask, let me back up why I asked that. So we were on vacation recently, and somebody said, "What's the plan B?" And I looked at my kids. I was like, "Look, there is no plan B. Like, we're doing that." And this was something silly, like something stupid, over going into the ocean when it was 55 degrees and it was freezing. And this guy's like, "Yeah, I've done it a million times." But for the normal dude, like, that was cool, right? The cold plunge, the whole the excitement, the energy it was going to bring. But, like, there was no plan B, right? We're going to go do it. And so, do you believe in a plan B?
Oh, that's definitely going to be a both and type answer. So it's the traditional paradox, right?
Well, yeah, there has to be a plan B when you're in the military, because that thing over there isn't going to go right. It's over there.
There's never a never, and there's never an always. So I guess, for me, I think about that. Like when I started Stonewater, for example, I remember a friend of mine, he's my financial advisor, and I'm like, "Hey, Tyler, does this make sense? Like, this does not seem like it makes sense." And he kind of looked at me and he's like, hunger's a hell of a motivator, meaning when failure is not an option, we can do some pretty amazing things. And he was right.
Yeah.
And for a lot of, I'm trying to think of some different examples I had, so for example, when, the event where I won my Silver Star, that option, like, failure is not an option. If we failed on that, we all died and became a story on, CNN or, Fox News or NBC or whoever. Like, it was, we have one option. We either succeed and survive, or there is no plan B. We had to fight our way out of a pretty tough situation. Um, being, when I've gone to these different selection processes and these different things, that I've gone through, I usually didn't have a solid plan B. It was like, hey,
Hmm.
I'm going all in. I'm leaving nothing on the table. I'm burning the boats. Like, I'm all in. And when I saw people who were like eminently qualified, but they'd go into these different challenges or courses, and they're like, well, I want to do this. I want to be a Green Beret, but if I don't, I've got this great backup plan. I'm going to go to grad school. And the harder things get, the more attractive plan B looks. So
Yeah.
for example, so it's one of those things where, when we go into combat, you go into, rescue prisoners or a hostage, or you're going to take down a terror cell or whatever, you have to have, if they're not here, then what? If this, you've got to have contingencies. It's a no fail mission. You have a plan B, C, D, E, and F. But I think when you're putting yourself out there and you're doing something uncomfortable, you're doing something hard, you're challenging your courage. If you have a plan B, especially if it's an attractive plan B, it gets a whole lot more attractive the harder things get.
Sure does.
You're like, man, I could call this big account. I could try to close this deal. Like, I don't know how it's going to go. Or I could go with these safer prospects. They're easier and smaller, low hanging fruit. I'm a big fan of send it, but at the same time, to your point, I think when I've taken high risks, that you do want to have some safety nets and contingencies there.
Right. Yeah.
It's a terrible answer to a simple question.
No, I think it's you're right, because even I'd never asked that question on you're my 370th interview, and I've never asked that question because it just literally came up this past week on vacation, and I was like, huh, and then it popped in my head based on something you said. So, talk about you've mentioned the Silver Star thing again. I've mentioned it numerous times. Like, can you walk us through that mission just to kind of give us a picture of what happened? Your back's against, like, what's going on during that mission?
Yeah, so it was in northwestern Afghanistan. I was a special forces team leader, and I was leading a team. There's about 5 of my Army Green Beret team members, and then 5 Marine special operators, roughly. And then we had about, I'd say, 30 Afghan commandos with us, and we were on a nighttime reconnaissance mission. So this was a little base in northwestern Afghanistan. It was kind of like the Alamo, and led this team out at night. We were in 3 different little groups. Each with between 7 to 12 people, and we were sneaking through this village to verify that all the civilians had left. We've been told we were new to the Green Berets were new to the area. The Marines had been there, and we were setting conditions for follow-on operations to clear this village in this valley. And we were told, like, hey, the civilians have fled. They've been gone for months. The Taliban kicked them out. They dug trenches around us. There's barbed wire. Like, they're like, this is unlike anywhere else you're going to see in Afghanistan. And at the back of my head, I'm like, it's probably kind of like that, but it can't be that extreme. Like, this is, 2010 in the U.S. Army. Like, come on. Trenches, really? Pish posh. And so we led this nighttime reconnaissance patrol, and it was eerie as heck. Like that, this village was totally abandoned. Like, there was ghost town. And we could hear and see the enemy moving around, but there was no civilians. And we started to see trenches and wire and bunkers. And at one point, I remember it was in 3 different groups. Or actually, no, I guess we were 4. And I'm like, hey, 2 were up on this high ground overwatching the rest of us. And then 2 of the groups were in the village kind of,
You're like walking around. Like those houses or little house type things. You're walking around them.
Exactly. Yeah. And we're verifying, like, no, there's no livestock. There's no people. There's just bad guys with guns and RPGs. And, I'm like, okay, I've seen enough. I was the ground force commander. I'm like, everyone, let's meet at this, there's a road intersection, there's a creek, and there's a big compound here. Let's rally up there, and then we're going to sneak back to base, and then we can set up. We can call our friends, and we can do a real operation, because you can tell we were outnumbered. We're like, this could go sideways pretty quick.
How far are you from these people when you're seeing it? Like when you're like, are you like looking around the corner of a house and they're like a mile up the road, or are they like 100 feet up the road?
No, they're just a block or 2 away. You just kind of see movement.
Yeah, close.
You hear a motorcycle drive off. Hear some radio squawk, things like that. And so the compound, as luck would have it, I picked what I thought was a really natural link-up spot, which it was. Unfortunately, the enemy also had thought that, and so they were having a district headquarters meeting there that same night. So I have one team show up on one side of the compound. Think like a strip mall sized compound, surrounded by a big mud wall. And one team shows up on one side, my team shows up at the other. And the team on the other side is like, hey, we're here. And I'm like, yeah, we're getting here too, on the radios. And they see some people walking towards them waving. And they're looking and they're like, it doesn't look like Phil and his team. And these people come closer and they say, well, they have AK-47s and they're very clearly Taliban. Well, the Taliban thought we were more Taliban coming to the meeting. So they're like waving us in.
Hey, come on
and then
in.
when they get close, they're like, wait a second, you don't wear helmets and have those weapons. And so it turned off, it quickly went from these groups coming together to a huge firefight in the space of about 30 seconds. So the enemy, about, 30 of them were between me and my other team. So these two little groups of, 10 people each are trying to connect. 30 people who really don't like us are in the middle, and they're surrounded by, they're basically like, a strip mall / Alamo.
Yeah.
So it was kind of a mess. So we quickly tried to fight and establish a foothold in that compound. We didn't realize there was 30 people there. We thought there was about 5.
Yeah.
And we quickly realized that we were in way over our heads, but there was no getting out now. Like, we were committed. So failure wasn't an option.
No plan B now.
Building. No plan B. And they were calling all their friends from the surrounding area. So, within about the first 10 minutes of that fight, I'd say of the 20 who were initially there, we had 7 injured and 1 dead on the friendly side.
On your team, yeah.
And including my medic, who was shot through the foot. So he's limping around trying to treat the wounded under fire, refusing to evacuate. And our medevac helicopters came and picked up our first wave of wounded. And, they obviously draw a lot of fire. And they came and they did a second run, and they're like, hey, we can't do any more runs. Just the way their gas and some setup was, they just couldn't support anymore. They're like, you guys got to ground evac people. Like, that's our only option right now. And I mean, they were getting shot to pieces too. So it was, pretty sporty night. Well, the bad weather moved in, so our air support couldn't see us either. So now we have no medevac, no air support. We're fighting to get a toehold in this compound that has about 10 times the amount of people we think. And we're on our own. And then we start getting reports that these larger enemy formations are coming in and surrounding us. We still had 2 groups that were up on the high ground. And they're like, hey, we got 10 more bad guys coming from this direction, 10 more from that direction. So we're fighting inside and out. And eventually, we get support from our higher command to use air support, even though they can't see the compound. They're very concerned about civilian casualties, rightfully so.
Sure.
But they're like, hey, we're only going to let you use air support if you can, verify there's no civilians. And I'm like, look, if there's any civilians here, they all have machine guns and rocket launchers. Like, I've been here now for about 4 hours. Everyone here is angry and armed. And they're like, well, okay, we'll give you air support, but you got to go verify. You got to go back in and verify where the airstrikes are. And I'm like, okay. So we pulled off. We were about 106 yards away, I think my GPS said, when the Air Force came in and bombed the compound that we were initially fighting in. And they flattened it. And so I'm here with my team, and we're scuffed up and we're exhausted now. I mean, we're about 5 hours into this. And I'm like, hey, we got to go take pictures for command. And my team's looking at me like, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. I go, I know, but that was part of the deal. Like, they don't understand the situation we're in. Like, we got to verify it for them. So I'm like, I'm not going to ask you guys to do it. I'll go do it. And one of my other guys, Mike, and my air support guy, Yuri, were like, okay, we'll come with you. And then a couple Afghans were like, they're like, yeah, we're in. Oh, safe, and so, it's like one of my favorite pictures of all my deployments is we go up there. And of course the Taliban who's coming, go, holy cow, they just flattened our headquarters. Like, we got to go pull our team out. They're worried about their friends and their comrades. So they're running to the compound to save their friends and see what the heck happened. We're running to the compound to take pictures, and we meet. So here's 3 Americans with cameras. I mean, obviously we have our weapons and we're doing our best, but we're not a fighting force. We're just there to verify that we did right.
Just here to take pictures.
Enemy, come on, guys. Time out.
Yeah.
And they probably couldn't hit us because they were laughing so hard. But yeah, there's this picture where there's two of us ducking our heads down, sprinting back, and you can't see the bullets in the air. It was pretty thick. So we run back, we get our pictures. We had called for reinforcements to come help bail us out, right? Our plan B, like, hey guys, like we're in a bad situation. Can you punch out with armored vehicles, secure this road so we can get out? And when our reinforcements came out, our quick reaction forces called, they themselves were blown up and attacked. So now we had to move to them to secure. But it was one of those things where it was about 3 in the morning, and our quick reaction force wasn't coming to help us. We had no air support. We had no medevac. I had wounded. We were already starting to get low on ammo, and we're fighting on all sides. And the Afghan commander is like, hey, just so you know, the Taliban is telling us, the Afghans, to just turn you guys over, and they're going to leave us alone. They said they just want the Americans. He's like, we're not going to do it.
Great.
But just so you know, that plan B is sounding pretty juicy to some of the guys who are, watching their friends and brothers get tuned up. And it is easy to get overcome with the stress and go, that's it, we're doomed. There's no way out of this. Like this story doesn't end well. But I remember, to your point earlier, taking a knee and just taking a breath and going, okay, I'm the leader. The most important thing I can do right now is think and make decisions clearly, because everyone else is just trying to save their life. And if I shoot, I'm just one shooter. I go, but if I can think and coordinate assets and make effective decisions, we might get out of this. And so it was that pause and just going, what is the next best thing I could do? And I'm like, hey, we gotta eliminate the threat from this compound. And that's where Hire said, look, we'll let you drop on it, but you've got to verify it's a clean drop. I'm like, okay, I can do that. Like, yeah. I have to be alive to verify it. So that's a good first step. And then it was, after they did that, it was like, okay, next thing we can do is link up with these other Americans who are stranded, fight our way to them. And so once we linked up with them, now all of a sudden we effectively tripled our force. And even though one of their armored vehicles was blown up, it still was a big chunk of metal with a machine gun on it, which was helpful. And then we did that, and it's like, how do we get our wounded out? We're like, hey, we're going to commandeer some vehicles. We've found some, we had Afghan army folks had a truck up there. So we started loading our people on and driving. We had to drive them through an ambush to get them to higher aid, but, push them out. And then we just fought our way back. And I remember getting back at one point, we were about a half mile from getting to this little Alamo base, our base, and talking to the colonel, the full bird colonel in charge of special forces in Afghanistan. And he's like, hey, you guys need to dig in and hold what you got. And I'm like, oh, not right now, man. I've got I'm the ground force commander, and I'm down to 2 magazines, no grenades, and my radio's about out of battery. He's like, I'm taking my wounded. We're getting back to base. We're going to refit, reassess, and you can fire me, but I'm not leaving my people out here right now.
No.
And again, he has a totally different context. And as soon as I got back to this base, he's waiting for me on the other end of the radio. I was pretty sure I was going to get relieved. And, he asked some questions, and we started to send him pictures from the fight. Like, hey, this is what we were in. Because this is, we couldn't send stuff digitally.
Yeah.
And the more they saw, they were like, oh, okay, this is different.
This is the real deal.
Yeah, here's the bunkers. Here's the trenches. Here's a line of my wounded. Here's, all the enemy, that we were able to take out. I mean, this was a rough night. And what we had thought was our worst night as a team, we're beat up, ended up being a really pivotal moment in that region, for years to come. It ended up that Taliban just got shellacked because, they're usually the challenge in those conflicts was finding the enemy. And in that conflict, everyone, the enemy massed on us. So there's no challenge finding them. They came out and because we had sort of that solution focused mindset of like, okay, how can we use our air support? And once we could, the enemy was all out in the open, and it was pivotal. I mean, it broke their back.
Wow.
There's one of the Marines who was on that mission, or he's actually on the rescue force, named, I think, Golemboski. He writes a book about it called, I think, Dagger 2-2. And he writes it from the Marines' perspective, but he captures a bit of that day in there. And yeah, it's pretty interesting. I mean, it's one person's perspective. It always is, but
Yeah. Well, man, thanks again for being in what you are and who you are and what you've done and your team and all of our men and women in the service. It's amazing. And just stuff like that. I mean, you could take that one story. I mean, I'm sure you do this in your business, but I mean, my God, the amount of leadership stuff that's there, right? And I was thinking about if they see you broken as the leader,
Yep.
you guys are all done, right? They have to see strength, even if it's not full blown strength. I got 2 magazines and no grenades and a low battery. You still got to come with a strong sense of leadership, don't you?
Yeah, and if you fixate on the problem gets worse. If you're like, man, we are totally screwed. If that's your
Right.
mindset, guess what? What you focus on expands.
Yeah.
And instead of just taking that breath and going, okay, what's the smallest thing we can do right now that'll make things better? Okay,
Yeah.
well, let's get our people together and let's move away from this compound full of angry enemy and
Yeah.
popping out of tunnels at us.
Yeah.
And when you take that mindset, it's amazing how that momentum builds, and it quickly, you can turn things around quite quickly, in my opinion.
Well, thanks for sharing that story, man. We're gonna bring it down to an easier level here for you. And this is a question we were joking about this on vacation as well. But if you had to be reincarnated, you get to come back as one thing. Are you coming back as a musician? You're going to control the whole crowd, an athlete, or just something totally different that I don't know about that you want to do? Which one are you coming back as?
Definitely not a musician. I would not do that to the world.
That's your social anxiety. I think wouldn't it be strong though if you could just take that microphone and just let them sing your lyrics, man? They're having the best night of their life. I'm a sports guy, and I don't know. I don't know what I would do.
No appeal of that for me.
Okay.
Man, I'm now I feel like I'm so vanilla on this, but it's funny. I was meeting with another guy yesterday, and he was talking about people remember stories, songs, and experiences. And I'm like, look, I got stories and experiences nailed. Songs, not my jam. I like athlete, but I'll be honest, man. I like being a commando. I like serving.
Well, I was gonna say I might come back as Phil Kornachuk. I mean, it's that story just told, and I've got I'm this
well,
yeah, that would be pretty badass too. But
I liked pushing myself to my physical limits for something bigger than me, for a purpose more than me, for other people, for a set of ideals. And I'm not saying, hey, every conflict I was in, like we were squeaky clean and you had to always, like, no, war is an absolute mess. Anyone I've been part of, and I've been part of several now, like it's a mess.
not easy.
But the training so that you can help your brothers and sisters live and at the end of the day, protect the nation. And again, to me, a set of ideals. I love that. Like that, it felt like an awesome end game. And even now, I try to take those lessons and those stories and those experiences, those people I've lived and served with, some are here, some aren't, and go, okay, how do I take Pat Tillman's legacy and channel that into this real estate firm or into this sports team? Yeah. So really boring to say, but I'd be good with doing the same life over again. I just try to make a few different decisions.
You're doing exactly what you're supposed to be doing. And look, you talked about the purpose and doing it for our nation and doing it for people and your brothers and sisters. And that's what it's all about, man. I may change my answer going forward. Well, Phil, man,
Please
thanks
don't.
so much for being on the Circuit of Success. It's been awesome having you. Tons of takeaways here. I don't normally go an hour, 3 minutes and 15 seconds, but we did it today, man, and we crushed it. So appreciate you being on the show.
Yeah. Appreciate you, Brett. Thanks so much.